Welcome to the Lessons for Luca podcast. I'm your host, Michael DeSanti, author of New Man Emerging, a transformational coach and trainer, and most importantly, I'm Luca's dad. I want to do this episode around a topic that has become controversial but doesn't need to be controversial. And there's a term that goes around our cultural narrative right now, the term of toxic masculinity. And I want to take a healthy angle, a new approach, or maybe a different approach where that could actually diffuse the challenging topic that this has become. And my goal in this episode is to give you an angle to approach masculinity that's not from a place of defensiveness or from a place of posture or from a place of superiority, because that's not really what healthy masculinity is about at all. The term toxic masculinity is actually it's actually an older term. When I say older, I mean my age old. Back in the 70s and the 80s, it was a term that was used in therapy circles and counseling circles around, it was a term given to abusive men that mistreated or took advantage of women, children, or the helpless. That's really where toxic masculinity, that's where the term originated. And rightfully so. Like, this is an extreme example of force and of misguided power, and it was from men that were abusive to, again, women, children, or the helpless. So that was a very contained definition for a really long time. Then in the Me Too movement came out, and you started to have these high-profile men exposed and for misusing power. And masculinity and toxic masculinity in that era kind of collapsed together. And we started to lose the distinction of, healthy masculinity and toxic masculinity. And we just labeled all masculinity as toxic. And I think that's where a lot of the charge and the misconception and the posturing and the defensiveness come in, because those are light years apart. Healthy masculinity and toxic masculinity are oceans and light years apart. And so I want to approach this from the angle of positive and healthy masculinity, because healthy masculinity is a requirement for harmony and for inner peace and for living a really meaningful and purposeful life. And the way I approach masculinity and femininity is really more of energetically and characteristic and attribute. When we put it to only gender, we start to box certain things in, and we really create more of a black and white field, or a binary field that doesn't really work when we come from it from a more effective angle or more useful angle, looking at it as attribute or energetically. So if you think of it from attribute or energy, and I'll do a whole podcast on this in the future, but if you look at masculine and feminine energy, we're really actually saying that men and women contain both. We both contain masculine and feminine energy. Masculine energy is more characterized for mind and logic, and feminine energy is more attributed to heart and emotion. And you could look at it as masculine and feminine. You could look at it as head and heart. You could look at it as yin and yang, yin being feminine energy, yang being masculine energy. But there's different attribute to the head and to the heart. And we want to be able to parse them apart so that we could use them most effectively. If you think of head and logic, well, those are really, really valuable traits, to be able to think logically, to be able to sequence logically, to be able to see something in life or a challenge in life and look at it from a logical angle. And logic is limited. We're not just logical beings, we're also emotional beings. And so when we look at something only from an emotional state, we could actually become really chaotic because we're not organizing it properly, putting it together and saying, okay, I have all this emotionality. How do I channel it so that it's effective? So masculine and feminine energy are really about harmony. If we live only in our head, if we live only from masculine energy, life becomes like this mental chess match of constantly worrying and trying to control external sources and outcomes and things that we actually can't even control. If life becomes all feminine energy and emotionality, then we start to be inaccurate and get lost in the temporary moment of emotionality rather than saying, taking a pause, zoom out, and see this as just an opportunity of a longer horizon and put some logic to it. So we want to marry and harmonize both our head and our heart, our masculine and our feminine energy, our yin and our yang. And so when we start to look at it from that approach, we start to realize like we don't all fit into one box. Men aren't monolithic. We're warriors and we're poets. We're lovers and we're fighters and we're farmers and we're protectors and we're sensitive and we're strong. And men aren't monolithic. We fit into all of these different organisms that have differences and have distinction and have strengths and weaknesses. And if we start to only have to fit into one box, into one channel, it leads to homogenization and it leads to lack of diversity. It leads to comparison because it has to look this way rather than celebrate the diversity of what masculinity really is and can be. So we want to be careful of only saying that masculinity has to be represented in this way and this is the only way that it looks. And I'll get into that here because as we start to parse this apart and start to look at it from a different angle, we could actually start to be way more effective in our life. And the way that I approach masculinity is I look at it as archetype. Archetype is really the manifestation of personality, or characteristic, or attribute. So the archetype that I live in my life or interact with the world really comes from a deeper place of characteristic, of attribute, of value, of personality, of persona. There's a lot that comes into or makes up an archetype. And there are what I call 4 archetypes of masculinity, or 4 archetypes of healthy masculinity. And I've developed this over the last several years. And it's funny, I didn't realize that as I was doing it, I was actually paralleling these unconsciously to a study that I later read years later, that the archetypes that I developed are actually completely congruent to the 4 most attractive qualities of men or masculinity. And I didn't realize that as I was putting this together, but I'll start with the most attractive features based on this study. The most attractive features of masculinity are, in no particular order, are kindness, intelligence, humor, and the ability to provide, protect, or procure future resources. So let me repeat those. Kindness, intelligence, humor, and the ability to protect, provide, and procure future resources. So if you look at this from, if you go back and simplify our position or our come from or point of view and perspective here, if you look at it from like a tribal standpoint or when we lived in bands and lived in small groups and gatherings, those would be really, really important attributes when picking, a partner or a mate. Are they kind? How do they treat the tribe? Are they intelligent? Will they make wise decisions? Are they humorous, meaning do they create a sense of lightness and a sense of safety? And will they be able to provide and protect and procure future resource? That's very, very important. Biologically, human beings haven't changed that much in thousands of years, but culturally and societally, we've changed at a rapid pace. But those biological attractions are still found in choosing partners and choosing spouses. So again, it's kindness, intelligence, humor, and the ability to protect, provide, and procure future resources. The way that I break those archetypes down are, I call them the warrior, the sage, the romantic, and the jester. And I'll break each of these down individually. But again, as I developed these, I realized that there was these pillars and these archetypes of masculinity. Again, now I later on in life or later on in my coaching practice, I've connected them to actually the four most attractive attributes. First is the warrior. The warrior in masculinity is that place that I genuinely desire to protect and provide for the things and the people that I love. And this is just deep innate in the masculine psyche and in the masculine heart, is that so much of my purpose and so much of my generativeness in life and my platforms in life is how do I provide and protect the things and the people that I love? How do I give them comfort and safety and opportunity? It's part of the warrior spirit of masculinity. And I want to highlight here, before I go any further, that each archetype has a light and a darkness to it, or a healthiness and a shadow to it. So as I reveal them, I'll reveal them in that light component, but also go toward, what is the dark component of that, or the shadow component of that, unhealthy component of that. So that warrior spirit to protect and to provide, to look after the things and the people that we love, that's deep inside the psyche and the spirit of masculinity. If again, going back to more tribes and more bands, that masculine spirit to go out and confront danger, to be courageous, to go out and risk and put your life on the line to either protect our band or to bring home and procure food and resource. That's deep. That is part of a long lineage of human being, to have that attribute of warrior. Now, what happens here is, remember, there's a light and a dark to each of these. When we live our life from warrior, it's very or warrior only, I should say. It's very easy to just put blinders on and think that my entire existence is about providing, especially in today's culture, which is just make money, provide resource. We want to be able to have a level of temperance that says, I provide, but I don't do it with horse blinders on. I provide, but I don't do it to a state of burnout. I provide, and then I understand when that threshold into unhealthy is crossed. That warrior, we've got to temper that warrior. If we don't temper the warrior becomes forceful. If we don't temper the warrior becomes irresponsible, even angry. So I want to temper that warrior. I want to make sure that I provide for the things and the people that I love. But I also want to know and have the wisdom to know when do I take out my sword and when do I sheathe my sword. That warrior is great for producing. That warrior is great for generating. That warrior is great for really pushing the limits and taking on life with a courageous action. But I don't want to do that at the sake of not being present with my family, not ever being content, not ever, enough is never enough. Like, it's always the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So we want to look at that warrior and say, okay, where does that warrior show up to protect and provide? And then where does that warrior know when to rest? And that's a big archetype for the masculine spirit. The second archetype is what I call the sage. The sage is the part of masculinity that wants to impart wisdom and knowledge, to teach lessons and to coach, to be an example, to shine light onto potential and possibility and point of view. The part of masculinity that's introspective, the part that uses wisdom as a guiding force in life, that wisdom is actually like an anchor and an immovable part of the masculine spirit, that we use our wisdom with accuracy, we use our wisdom with humility and with empathy, that we continue to look deep within and shine light on the darkness and the shadows that are within us, that we and then contribute that back to the generations in front of us and the generations that come after us. That we have this desire to teach and to coach and to be an example and to pass and impart on wisdom. That's the sage. The sage is that part of us that really wants to be of value through intelligence. It's a huge part of the masculine spirit. It's a huge light of the masculine spirit. And that dark part of it is that when that sage becomes extreme, it turns into arrogance. It turns into righteousness and superiority. It loses empathy because it sees one model of the world and thinks or demands that everything fits into that model, rather than be open-minded, that practice intelligence and empathy, practice a zoomed-out lens and a greater perspective and point of view. When that, I always loved, I think it's the quote by Aristotle, Plato, that says it's the intelligent that are always curious and the foolish that are always right. That's a quote that sums up that sage. Like, we want that wisdom and that intelligence, and we want to contribute that. But if we haven't gone through the process of alchemizing it and testing in our life, using our experiences to create deeper and deeper sense of empathy and understanding to others, then we start to use our intelligence and we start to use our sageness as a weapon of superiority and of posturing. And so we want to temper that sage in us and make sure that our intelligence and our wisdom is actually is tempered with empathy and with understanding. Third archetype of masculinity is what I call the romantic. The romantic directly connects. It's not really just as a spouse or a partner, but it's really to the tribe overall. The romantic is really directly connected to the attractive feature of kindness. And with kindness requires an element of sincerity. Like, there's a very big difference between being nice and being kind. You get fake being nice. Kindness requires sincerity. And our most sincere kindness is when we can contribute to others and they don't have the opportunity to even contribute back to us. Like, what do you give or contribute to someone that really can't give you anything in return except perhaps compliment or affection? And so that level of kindness, that romantic is really the part of me that sincerely wants to love and contribute and be generous to others, to contribute to the people in my tribe, in my family, in my band, in my systems, not for love, but from love, not for affection, but from a place of affection. That I care about you so much that I would genuinely give and contribute to your life, knowing you can't give the equal or same amount back. And that's that romantic part of us. That's that romantic part of masculinity that wants to be a lover and in service and a contribution to the systems around him. remember there's a dark side. And that dark side, when overextended, when the romantic is overextended, we really become a people pleaser, a rescuer. We take loyalty to an extreme. We become overextended. And in that dark part of the romantic, when it's not matured enough through genuine, sincere service, we'll be so overextended that we become the people pleaser or the nice guy, and we overextend ourselves, we overextend our resource, and what we do is we self-abandon in order to get your love, attention, affection, acceptance, or approval. And we have to self-abandon in order to do that, and it leads to radical, deep states of resentment. And so as that romantic archetype, we want to make sure that my service is sincere, and we also want to make sure that my love and my kindness is sincere, but it also includes me and where it's healthy for me and where I'm overextended. And so that's that part, that archetype that we wrestle with around boundary, around health, around not being overextended so much that we get burnt out or resentful. And so that's that archetype of the romantic. The fourth archetype of masculinity for me is what I call the Jester. The Jester is the part of us that really wants to see the world as an innocent and place filled with humor and magic and laughter. The Jester in us is the part of us that wants to remind ourselves and the people that we love that life doesn't always have to be so serious, that we will one day laugh at our troubles, that one day, we will look back and say, wow, I can't believe I gave that much energy to something so small. It's the Jester in us is the part of us that really loves and values humor, to be able to laugh at ourselves, to laugh with others, to remind each other that we can't always be so serious in life and so rigid in life, that to actually stop and pause and take it in, to laugh, to be kind to ourselves, to collect and capture all those moments that make life worth living, rather than this rigidity and this seriousness that a lot of times we find ourselves in when we're in a state of emotional survival. And so that Jester is that part of us that wants to make light and turn the temperature down in the room when things get too tense and too stressed. The dark side of the Jester really becomes like if I take nothing seriously, my life really becomes a failure to launch. That I create a Peter Pan complex, and I never make the bridge, I never close the gap between boyhood and manhood. That I remain immature, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. That I don't develop skill sets of mastery, and I remain a little boy. We don't want that. We don't want to become a failure to launch. We want to take that innocence of youth, and then we want to cross that bridge into healthy masculinity, into manhood, and take that innocence with us as we go generate and create in the world. When we live too much in the archetype of Jester, we become a failure to launch. We become degenerative. We don't contribute to life. We don't contribute to our culture and society. We don't take ourselves and life seriously enough to actually move through adversity and to grow. So that becomes the dark side of the Jester. And so really what I'm pointing to here is healthy masculinity is having a deep understanding and a deep experience of being that warrior, but also being that sage, being that romantic, and also being that Jester. And there's an interesting thing that I coach on, and I always tell the people that I coach, like, if you want to be successful, be really, really good at one thing. But if you want to be fulfilled, be dynamic. And where I'm pointing to here with masculinity and healthy masculinity is you want to be dynamic with all four of these archetypes. if your life is all warrior, you're going to become rigid. You're going to become so strict that you lose out on the jester in life. You lose out on relationship. You lose out on that romantic. You'll lose out on service. If you are only all sage, then you miss out, and you miss out on that level of humor. You miss out on that level of generating something of value. You miss out on that level of protection and providing, because life just becomes this constant inflection of I have all the right answers, and that generates superiority and righteousness, and it actually deteriorates relationships. If you're all jester, you become a failure to launch. If you're all romantic, then you become a nice guy and constantly overstretched, and which leads to resentment. To be dynamic is to know when is it the most appropriate, and to what amount do I bring out that warrior? Do I bring out that sage? Do I bring out that romantic? Do I bring out that jester? And knowing how much of what and when is the emotional distinction of temperance. Temperance is like temperature. To know that this level is effective, but beyond it becomes ineffective. That this level is comfortable and healthy, and this level is unsafe and unhealthy. Temperance is a part of maturity. Temperance is a part of knowing when to bring out that sword and when to sheath it. Temperance is the part of maturity that knows, when do I bring out the rose and when do I bring out the hammer? And having this intelligence and this wisdom through experience to know the difference. If life is constantly asking you for a hammer, that you get to be dedicated and warrior-like and committed and sacrifice for the greater good of your nucleus, but you keep bringing out the rose and just trying to get everyone to like you or to not take things seriously, then you're going to be ineffective. But if life is asking you to bring out the rose, a level of sensitivity or a vulnerability, maybe in your marriage or in your relationships, and you keep coming in swinging a hammer, you're going to be ineffective. And so masculinity is knowing that I will wrestle with these archetypes, and that some of them are more appropriate at times than others. And that's that distinction of temperance, knowing how much of when for how long. And so to practice temperance, I live by a particular code that says that, edit here, Andrew. And so to practice temperance, I always live by this code. And I'll share this code with you here. It's just a part of a code that I live by, which is always temper your wisdom with simplicity. Always temper your power with humility. Always temper your honesty with sensitivity. And always temper your ambition with priority. To temper your wisdom with simplicity is to forever remain curious and humble and open and empathetic. To temper your power with humility is to look at my power as a place where I share it rather than hoard it and use force. To temper my honesty with sensitivity is to make sure that I'm always with honesty and direct reflection, and that I'm always geared to serve someone rather than cut them down and hide behind, well, I'm just being honest. And to temper my ambition with priority is to make sure that I don't lose myself in this growth while harming the nucleus and the things and the people that I love with my lack of presence or with my lack of proximity and never being around. I want to make sure that as I grow my ambitions, the things and the people that I love are growing with me. So always temper your power with humility, always temper your wisdom with simplicity, always temper your honesty with sensitivity, and always temper your ambition with priority. I think when we put all this together, it reflects great in a famous quote by Plato that says, the greatest measure of a man is what he does with power. And what we're talking about here is that this power, when tempered and when used effectively and appropriately, it lifts everyone up. It makes everyone better. It protects, it provides, it loves, it serves, it gives and receives wisdom and intelligence. It makes kindness a ultimate virtue. And it reminds us that we're innocent and that life is filled with magic and filled with laughter and filled with adventure. One of my favorite quotes ever is by one of my favorite poets, Khalil Gibran, and I think it wraps together everything that we're talking about here. And it says, "Keep me away from wisdom which does not cry, the philosophy that does not laugh, and the greatness that does not bow before children." And that, to me, is the representation of healthy masculinity, that I operate as a warrior, as a sage, as a romantic, and as a jester. And I bring that to my life. I bring that to my marriage. I bring that to my family. I bring that to my community. I bring that to the world over and over and over again, not out of perfection, but out of polishing, not out of a rigidity and force, but out of empathy and out of contribution. And I think when we reframe masculinity and pull it away from this toxicity that we're starting to inject into our culture, we could actually resettle it and make it foundational again with our inner warrior, our inner sage, our inner romantic, and our inner jester. And so that's, I think, the opportunity, and that's a new, potentially and hopefully fresh and new perspective to engage with masculinity from a really purposeful, powerful, and meaningful and effective way, rather than force things into separate camps and say it has to look this way. Remember, if you want to be successful, be really, really good at one thing. But if you want to be fulfilled, be dynamic. And so continue to polish these inner archetypes of masculinity and see how they positively contribute not only to your life, but the lives around you. As always, thank you so much for being on this journey with me. Until we meet again, be a good man, live a good life, and determine each of those for yourself.